in the midst of everything, middle semester, thresholds of change of season, frantic rush everywhere, headlong bustle. One thing needful is to break the grip of obsession and notice our individual embodiment and our social hope. Thinking disability is decisive to what we want in the humanity. Thinking about it in a focused way, like today, but also making sure that this one day doesn't disappear in the bustle when it comes back. Many of us here carry strong, sustaining memories of the conversations of last spring. Today we continue the conversation that started then. Something I've learned hanging out with the humanities. It's the very best thing we can do to find a way to carry on conversations, to keep them going, not just to blurt it out in one bleat of intensity. Disability thinking is so underrepresented. Underrepresented in academic conversation and in the everyday life of the university. But I don't think I'm wrong in saying that we've turned a corner recently and that energy, intensity, and interest are growing. They'll be growing again during the next few hours, and they can be sustained. I'll point out that we have remote captioning and that you can access it through a laptop or through a link. Words like thank you can lose their oomph, but they better not today. This event, in particular, is the result of so much energy, ingenuity, patience, shrewdness, and heart. Above all, from Angela Nemechek. Others help indispensably, but this one has Angela's signature and her smile in every corner. It's remarkable to work alongside her. It's been thrilling and warming to watch what she can do when she has a chance to show it all. Will you, in fact, thank her right now? I said it's Angela's work, and it is, but in another sense, from a larger and older perspective, there at the source and foundation stands Chris Krentz. Chris opened disability studies to so many of us. To me, I know. He's my friend and mentor, and I admire so fully what he does and who he is. So it wouldn't be possible without Angela, and it wouldn't be possible without Chris. We've already thanked Angela, and as Chris comes up to make proper introduction of our distinguished and wonderful guest, let's thank Chris too.
Thank you very much, Michael. And before I proceed with the introduction, I need to say a few more things. First of all, to Michael Davidson himself and the Institute of the Humanities and Global Cultures, which is making a huge difference here at the university. And this was really Michael Davidson's vision, going back 10, 15 years, and as director, he has made that vision a reality. He has made the Institute of Humanities and Global Cultures a very important force here at UVA, so thank you for that. I also want to thank members of the Disability Assets Committee and also the UVA Student Council who provided financial support. Is Eugenie Kwan here? This week is the end of Disability Acceptance Week here at UVA. And many universities have Disability Awareness Weeks, but I like the way that Eugenie and her colleagues have changed that to Acceptance Week. That's a good message to send. Okay, to introduce our keynote speaker. Disability has long been thought of as a medical problem in need of a medical solution. That's probably a model we're all familiar with. But in recent decades, disability activists and scholars have begun to expand that model and at times refute it to call attention to disabled people as a group that is often stigmatized, often oppressed, a group that possesses human and civil rights. And some changes have happened in the last 2 decades. One change has been the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. Every day I'm thankful for the passage of that act because that allows me to teach with a sign language interpreter. And I think if I had lived half a century ago, my career would be very different without that. Then thinking on a global scale, the United Nations in 2006 endorsed a convention on the rights of persons with disabilities that again adopted a human rights framework to education, to just basic human rights. So we're getting beyond the medical model. And that's an exciting thing about the conversations we've started to have on grounds, because every unit on grounds can contribute something to our understanding of disability. Politics, law, history, literature, aesthetic reputations, art departments. It's hard to think of any unit, bioethics, psychology. Everybody has something to say about disability. And disability studies as a field has built on identity movements in interesting ways. Disability and critical black theory. What does disability add to critical black theory? What does critical black theory add to our understanding of disability? Some exciting connections for disability in feminist theory, disability in class, and disability in queer theory. And our keynote speaker today is one of the leading scholars in that conversation between disability theory and queer theory. What do they have to do with each other? So I'm really excited to have Robert McRuer here. He's professor of English at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and also chair of the English department. And he somehow has time to keep publishing and traveling and speaking. So it's a rare privilege to welcome him. He has a background in queer theory. His first book was called Queer Renaissance, and looked at contemporary LGBT writers. And he has mentioned that his work on AIDS and HIV led him to disability studies. And just this morning I learned that he was encouraged by none other than Rosemary Garland Thompson, who some of you might remember spoke in our symposium last spring. And this is interesting because Rosemary Garland Thompson had a big influence on me too. So there's just more evidence of how a very generous senior scholar can have a huge impact on others. So his second book was called Crip, Cultural Signs of Queerness and Disability, and that really put queer theory and disability studies into conversation with each other in some unexpected and surprising ways, showing how both queerness and disability offer sites of resistance to the dominant norm and add a vibrant strain to human diversity. He came up with many concepts, including compulsory able-bodiedness, which has been very useful to many disability studies scholars. He has co-edited a volume called Sex and Disability. That's not a title you see every day. And published countless articles, as I mentioned. Now he is working on a book that considers locations of disability and resistance around the world. His work is always bold, often provocative, and challenging. And I'm really excited to welcome Robert McRuer here today.
Thanks so much, Chris, and Angela, and everyone who has made this possible. I'm really happy to be here with you at UVA, my first time in Charlottesville. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a great afternoon and a really good conversation about a range of things. What I'm presenting to you today was from a book called Cripping, Austerity, but I'm changing the title. But that's not the important issue. The project, nonetheless, still is a project that is basically looking at the centrality of disability to a now global politics of austerity and uses disability theory and Crip theory to understand that centrality. The book is largely centered on the UK, where since 2010 the Tory Liberal Democrat coalition has put in place sweeping austerity measures that have been quite devastating to disabled people. But the book also, as I said, is about a globalized austerity politics, and so it looks to other locations, and I will be talking about another location today, about Mexico. The British government has declared 2015 the year of Mexico in the UK and the UK in Mexico, and there will be echoes of that here. It's kind of investment speak, not really anything about human beings necessarily. We're going to start today in Mexico City. And I don't remember what title I sent in, but I'm giving the title of my talk today as Curb Cuts, Crip Displacements, and Edificio de Enfrente. So I open this talk with an image of an access ramp, or probably more appropriately, an access ramp in Mexico City. This photograph is from Calle Merida, in the neighborhood known as Colonia Roma. It's the north end of the neighborhood, right where the street begins, just south of Avenida Chapultepec. Access ramps like this one are now in evidence throughout most of the central parts of the city. They are certainly in evidence in almost all the streets of Colonia Roma. And in fact, the redesigned corners around the Plaza Luis Cabrera, a few blocks west of Calle Merida, includes markers in the pavement that make clear that this is Nuestro México del Futuro, our Mexico for the future, or of the future. I begin this talk, though, then, with a cultural sign of disability, a curb cut, that we know how to read if we are attuned to the ways disability movements of the past few decades have reinvented or re-envisioned and rebuilt public space. This is, go back. This is, however, a cultural sign of disability, however compromised, because there's certainly no guarantee that a wheelchair user could easily navigate this space at the corner of Merida and Chapultepec. Although the incline from the street is to the sidewalk is not too steep, unlike many of the corners in the federal district. A slightly twisted and faded sign announces peligro, cables de alta tensión, luz y fuerza. So danger, cables of high tension, energy, and force, suggesting that a high voltage shock, or worse, might await someone attempting to access the ramp. Still, in spite of, or in some ways because of the fact that this is a compromised disability sign, we know how to read it. But I want to open this talk, starting over, as it were, with three Crip images, or three images to Crip. And they're slightly blurry images, I'm afraid. They're taken from another book. When it is published, it will be clearer, since they will be from the originals. This first image is a photograph showing a building near the final stages of demolition. Beneath a mostly cloudy sky, surrounded on three sides by walls, or perhaps a facade, sits a pile of debris, red bricks, pieces of cement, wood, and dust. The other two images represent two haunting and empty bedrooms. They're actually perhaps not even immediately legible as bedrooms, although it's clear that they are locations for sleeping or at least resting. So the first one here shows a simple blue sleeping bag on a wooden floor with a worn yellow throw pillow embroidered with three yellow flowers at the head. And crowded around the sleeping bag are a range of objects: shoes, books, blankets, perhaps a basket of laundry. The second shows not a bed, but a sofa alongside a cracked stone or plaster wall. Dingy shades indicate a window in the upper left, while the sofa, which is also faded in yellow, has one arm missing, perhaps indicating that it was once a sectional, occupies the center of the photograph. And a colorful Spider-Man quilt is is thrown over the sofa and hangs off the end where there is no arm. So these photographs do not immediately present themselves as disabled or Crip images. Like the access ramps, however, they do represent a changing Mexico City. And this time, this is from an eventually largely demolished tenement called Edificio America, which is Calle Merida number 90, numero 90. Merida 90, this building, is also in Colonia Roma, which is a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood west of the historic center. I'm going to make a contention that illegible disability images actually are quite worrisome to us. So I hope that why that is worrisome will be clear as I conclude. But don't worry, I'm going to come back to more recognizable images as I continue, even though this paper is actually largely about cripping a politics of recognition. And I hope what I mean by that will be clear as I continue as well. So the images from Merida 90 are part of photographer Livia Radwanski's project documenting from 2009 to 2010 the changes in the neighborhood and the demolition of the tenement. Radwanski is a Brazilian photographer living and working in Mexico, and she resided alongside the tenement, interviewed and befriended the people who lived there, and took photos of them. Not long after her arrival in the neighborhood, a sign on the door of Merida 90, this is not her photo but mine, a sign on the door of Merida 90 announced, "This building is the property of the Department of Housing of the Federal District. It is being evacuated because of the risk of imminent collapse. If you continue occupying it, you are exposing yourself, your family, and your belongings to the likelihood of suffering severe damage or injury." The building and the neighborhood were significantly impacted by the earthquake that hit Mexico City in 1985 and by subsequent natural disasters, including floods and sinking of the ground. But natural, however, like access, needs to be flagged as a word worth questioning. Most natural disasters in Mexico City, for centuries in fact, might be easily justified as or described as unnatural. The indigenous population did not, in fact, reside in many sections of what is now Mexico City, which was initially islands surrounded by small bodies of water. In the 17th century, the Spanish began the process of filling in the area where the central city now sits, ensuring that 5 centuries later there has been substantial sinkage throughout. So the Palacio de Bellas Artes, the Palace of Fine Arts, in fact, has sunk more than 4 meters over the last century. So what was the ground floor at the beginning of the 20th century is now in the basement. Numerous families and individuals lived in or occupied Merida 90 at the time of Radwanski's project, and some families had been there since the 1930s. So although it became a tenement by the end of the 20th century, it had not always been one. By the first decade of the 21st century, construction was booming in Colonia Roma, with hundreds of new buildings going up in tandem with the preservation of historical districts. And those are words I pause over as well, simply because the identification of what counts as a historical district is never free of class interests, the class interests that drive shifts in the urban landscape. Showing you some images from another street in Colonia Roma on Calle Chihuahua, which is 1 block north of the plaza that we were just looking at. And on the sign that we just passed, I'm showing you now the facade, the developers note that there will be terraces, apartments with patios, high ceilings, 2 parking places, and a casa enfachada catalogada, so a facade that is in the historical catalog of facades. So, Nuestro México del Futuro, our Mexico of the future, it seems, preserves the past for those who can afford to buy a piece of it. Radwanski's project documents the ways in which the people and the location of Merida 90 were affected by this desarrollo, or development. And in her project, she always puts the word desarrollo in quotation marks in order to mark it as a word and a process that her photographs will interrogate. When Merida Noventa was demolished, promises were made to the families living there that they could return. There are various means for accessing that possibility, most notably an expropriation law that basically says if your property where you are living is seized by the government, there has to be a new living space offered to you within 5 years, and the families are working with legal assistance to ensure their return. Radwanski herself is cautiously optimistic that that return will be possible. But as of today, the residents of Merida Noventa continue to wait, and a new home for them has not been provided. Radwanski's photographic project was eventually displayed in the Museo de Arte Moderno, the Museum of Modern Art, in Chapultepec Park in Mexico City, where I first encountered it in July 2013. There, it was one component of El Museo de los Desplazados, the Museum of the Displaced, which is a theoretically global and itinerant project developed by an artist collective called Left Hand Rotation. As part of their project, Gentrificación no es un nombre de señora, gentrification is not the lady's name, in which this project, they examine the role of culture in the processes of gentrification. Almost half of the installations for this project, there are more than 24 at this point, have been in Spain, where it began in 2010, but it has also involved artists and communities in Portugal, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, China, Germany, Turkey, and the United States. Queer theorist Jose Munoz in part provides authorization for me in reading the photos that I began with as Crip images. In his book, his final book before his death, Cruising Utopia, the Then and There of Queer Futurity, Munoz often reads queerness into spaces absent of actual bodies. Munoz reads the photography of Kevin McCarty in particular as queer, even if, and in many ways precisely because, that photography is often not directly representational of human beings. For Munoz, McCarty's vacant photographs exemplify the central thesis of Cruising Utopia, which is the idea that queerness is not yet here, and we are not yet queer. It is something always to come. One example from McCarty's work represents an empty stage in the Silver Lake Lounge, a predominantly Latino gay club in Los Angeles. There's a dark rug on the stage, and the curtain glimmers a silver black in the background. The main source of illumination for the photograph is the word salvation, which appears in arch lights above the performance space. The bright, shining ideality of salvation, Munoz writes, hangs over a space that is dark and not very promising, except that the concept literally is writ large on top of the picture. In this visual study is embedded the nature of a utopian performativity within subaltern spaces. So essentially, Munoz is always reaching elsewhere for a queer then and there. That is something that's not here and now, but will be then and there. And so his reading of these haunting and enigmatic McCarty photographs, and in some ways this whole project near the end of his career, is intended for us to hear aspirational echoes. Something like, we are not yet here, we are not yet queer, get used to it. I'll argue, looking at Radwanski's photographs, that similar Crip echoes linger in the air of the bedrooms she photographs and bounce off the walls, the crumbling walls, in risk of imminent collapse. So I'm going to examine more of Radwanski's photographs momentarily, including some that do include representations of some of the former residents of the building. But before doing that, and with Munoz's tacit authorization to read those haunting images as Crip, I want to think more carefully about bedrooms. Bedrooms in our moment. Pero no esos dormitorios mexicanos, not those Mexican bedrooms. What I'm going to do in this section is talk with you a bit about British bedrooms to generate some of the key points that I'll carry back to Mexico City a bit later. In March and April of 2013, the British press was in fact filled with stories about bedrooms. In its April-May 2013 edition, to pick one example, the left British magazine Red Pepper, like many other online and print periodicals, reported scathingly about something called the bedroom tax. And as this image suggests, the bedroom tax, the new policy that I'm about to describe to you, made those who were impacted by it feel as though they were under siege. Officially, the bedroom tax mandates a reduction of benefits, and it's generally referred to by Tory politicians who avoid the language that's in more popular circulation in relation to the policy. For them, it's the under-occupancy penalty. It was implemented on April 1st, 2013, as just one new piece in the sweeping austerity measures put forward by the coalition government upon taking office in 2010. So in Britain, after the last election, the Tories and the Liberal Democrats formed a coalition that many British voters did not believe would hold until the 2015 elections that are coming up, as there are many fractures in that coalition, including quite pronounced fractures around the bedroom tax. The Tory leader, David Cameron, is very much in favor of this policy, and the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Deputy Prime Minister, has denounced it repeatedly and said that what's needed, in fact, would be something along the lines of a mansion tax. There's many more things I can say about the fractures in the coalition, but I want to talk with you more about the bedroom tax and what it is. The tax mandates that benefits paid to claimants are reduced if they're found to have too much or excess living space in the property that they are renting. So if social housing tenants of a working age have so-called spare bedrooms, the housing benefit that they receive is reduced. If tenants have one spare room, for example, they lose 14% of their housing benefit. If they have two, they lose 25%. This steep reduction explains why many people affected by the tax experience it as such, even if it's not officially called that. Red Pepper reported that on average those affected lose £14 a week in housing benefits, and of the 660,000 people affected by it, 2/3 of those are households that include a person with disabilities. The tax has disproportionately hit the north of England, where the old industrial towns traditionally built bigger houses, and there has been little demand for 1- or 2-bedroom dwellings. So on this final point about the north, it's sort of worth noting that there's a bit of an irony when talking about the global north when you're actually thinking about England itself, since most of the capital and neoliberal spectacle is actually located in the south and not in the more impoverished areas of the north. By the end of 2013, Prime Minister David Cameron was in heavy damage control mode, arguing that disabled people were exempt from this policy. 18 prominent disability organizations drafted a letter that December insisting that Cameron's backtracking was misleading. 2 exemptions appeared to be in place. One for families with disabled children who, for whatever reason, could not share bedrooms with siblings, and one for families who frequently needed someone not living with them to be present for overnight care. Roughly matching the Red Pepper figures, the disability organizations noted that in their letter that 400,000 disabled people were hit negatively by the tax. And in some ways, though, the point is not what's the number, what's the right number, but rather simply the point that they wanted to make is that these austerity cuts have been devastating to the lives of countless disabled people and families across Britain. Right, so on the surface, this bleak housing situation has little or nothing to do with Crip displacements in Mexico City. My interest in this project, however, in this paper, is in placing the bedroom tax in a larger, globalizing British disability context. So in relation to this context, and moving back to Mexico City, I'm interested in what the British government was doing in 2013 across the Atlantic in the days leading up to the implementation of the bedroom tax. Somewhat unbelievably, and I'm serious, even if, as I will make clear, the cultural logic of neoliberalism was obviously at work, What was happening in Mexico was that the British government was in fact busily exporting its disability vision to its Mexican partners. The UK was exporting, however, a more recognizable disability vision. On Friday, March 22nd, 2013, British Ambassador Judith McRuer presided over an event called Mexico City for Everyone, the Accessibility Legacy of London 2012. On its website, this is not actually an image from the website, but it is an image from a corner outside the embassy. On the website, the embassy proudly displays images of an elderly woman using a walker crossing the street. The Union Jack is visible in the background of her, and the four corners, which make clear that this intersection has been donated by Great, all caps in English, Britain, is clearly visible. When I myself visited the intersection in this past August, the lettering was still visible on the pavement, although the intersection was already cracked and in disrepair. In relation to the March 2013 event, Mexico City for Everyone is what it was called. That's the English translation that the embassy used on its website. The much longer Spanish language description of the event used both Ciudad de México para todos, Mexico City for everyone, and more prominently, ciudades para todos, todas, cities for everyone, gesturing towards universal design and suggesting or implying in the process of this expansive gesture that this British export can work anywhere and everywhere. The four corners outside the British embassy were part of a larger initiative, not solely British, for redesigning thousands of other intersections across Mexico City. Indeed, you can see this design similar to the ones that I showed you in Colonia Roma. Several Mexican dignitaries and celebrities were in attendance outside the embassy with Ambassador McRuer and her assistant, Julie Fleck, who was Director of Accessibility for the London 2012 Games, for the ribbon-cutting ceremony and photo opportunity, an event that was also essentially donado for Great Britain. The group of dignitaries included Fidel Perez, who's Executive Director of the Program for People with Disabilities in the Federal District, and Gustavo Sanchez Martinez, a Paralympic swimmer, intimately familiar with London and the London Aquatics Center since he won 2 gold medals, 1 silver, and 1 bronze there during the 2012 Games. Inevitably, however, the sunny booster narrative put forward by the British Embassy in Mexico City obscured what we might understand as the climate change around disability back on the other side of the Atlantic. Undoubtedly, even if universal design was part of Fleck's presentation, no mention was made in English or Spanish of the taxed UK bedrooms, or of the fact that this weekend of March 22nd saw marches and protests in Birmingham, Bournemouth, Brighton, Bristol, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, London, and Sheffield. Activists that weekend were protesting the coalition's austerity plans in general, and specifically something called workfare, which had been put in place by the Department of Works and Pensions, and which meant that unemployed people could be forced into 6 months of compulsory unpaid work as part of the Community Action Program. On December 3rd, 2012, which is International Disabled People's Day, the Department of Works and Pension introduced such compulsory unpaid work for disabled and sick claimants. For Sanchez Martinez himself, the March 22nd ribbon-cutting ceremony wasn't the first time that his London successes had brought him in contact with politicians in Mexico City. At an award ceremony a few months after the London 2012 Paralympic Games and the day before the DWP in the UK introduced compulsory unpaid work for sick and disabled claimants, Sanchez Martinez received the Premio Nacional de Deportes, the National Prize for Sport, and that December 2nd award ceremony was held by the newly elected and contested Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto at his official residency, Los Pinos. Los Pinos is also in Chapultepec Park, where one could, as I said, visit El Museo de los Desplazados. although the exhibition with Radwanski's photographs didn't open until May 2013, and Peña Nieto's ceremony for Sanchez Martinez was in December 2012. In a sense, almost literally, the point that I'm making here is that displacement and dispossession were in the shadow of incorporation. Sanchez Martinez, in other words, as an out and proud disabled person and athlete, was recognized by the state in essentially the same location where the artist collective left-hand rotation would later interrogate a range of state-sponsored projects of eviction and displacement. So Radwanski's was just one of them. There was also exhibits focusing on Rotterdam and Sao Paulo and displacement. I'm going to skip a very large section here about Mexico. There's a lot more to say about Peña Nieto. And jump to some final images and some concluding thoughts here. Of course, with my comments about the spatiality of Los Pinos, the presidential residence, what I'm saying is that the haunting Mexican bedrooms that Radwanski photographs and the under-occupancy that they highlight are discernible in the shadow of the president's accolades for Paralympian Sanchez Martinez. But my larger point in this presentation is that they're also in the shadow of the British Goodwill event. My thesis, really, is that as openness and accessibility are exported and imported, so too are the forms of displacement and dispossession that are masked by them. Cripping, a politics of recognition, entails grappling with those processes and noting a sharp distinction between access and neoliberal access. I suspect that Marx would see neoliberal access as, what he says about commodities in general, a very queer thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. Marx famously talks about how the conversation among commodities lures over the relations between human beings and turns them into relations between things. That's the argument that I'm making about a certain kind of neoliberal accessibility. So my main argument in the project in general is that attending to these processes of displacement and dispossession can exist without disability, even if it requires us to read and write disability differently. So I just want to show you a few more of Radwanski's images in conclusion to get at that process of reading and writing disability differently. This is not one of her images, but rather the title slide for the project in general, La gentrificación no es un nombre de una señora. All right, I'm going to show you quickly 3 images from Radwanski in the interest of reading and writing disability differently in our moment. None of these images are immediately legible as disabled. I begin with a photo here of a 16-year-old boy named Carlitos, who is caught, as the notes that Radwanski writes for this photo tells us, in a moment